Ready? So today I want to talk about everything gaming. Now, all of you know, or at least most of you know, that I've had a long tryst with gaming and game development. I actually made this short game demo called Mumbai Mein Ek Hadsa. You can actually download it from itch.io and play it. This was many years ago. And then about a year and a half ago, we built a game that you could play in your browser with Unity called Overpowered the Card Game. You know us, we keep running these experiments. The only thing with gaming that worries me is I don't know where the market is. And I don't think for the kind of games that I want to make, games that you can play on your PC, I don't think there's a market in India. So you need international distribution. It's a totally different way to play things, which this report covers. We'll do credits towards the ending, but this is a fantastic report about the state of gaming in India, where venture capitalists are looking to invest, how much money there is, what does the market look like for mobile gaming and PC gaming. We're going to talk about what the development cycle looks like, where there's interest, is there interest in consoles. We're going to cover all of it today, thanks to a report by Bloom Ventures called The Gaming Blueprint. So without much further ado, welcome to Breakdown. Before I proceed, I want to talk to you about the backer of today's video, which is the 01 Network. So the 01 Network did something pretty awesome, which is it went to a lot of good creators that they liked, and they said, are there other ideas that you want to explore, that you want to make channels around, that we can back in some way? We don't really care about the views, but as long as it's doing valuable things, and as long as these are ideas that you want to explore where you're not sure it could be massy, go do it and we'll back you. So thank you to 01 Network for making this happen. Without much further ado, let's get straight to the video. Bloom says, by 2027, it says that the Indian gaming market will reach about $8.6 billion in value, and it's $2.6 billion currently. While India has captured only 1.5% of the global market by revenue, it's 500 million gamers and 115 million paying users. It is a decent chunk of the global player base already. Over the course of time, as younger generations become the key customers, the spending patterns in the market will also shift to become a core gaming market rather than a real money gaming market right now. Right now, it's kind of like a gambler's market, and we'll talk about that. But I think people will get into gaming for the enjoyment of the game, not to try and make money or lose money on it. Now, here are some more stats if you do want to make a game in India. There are 568 million gamers in the country. 90% of these gamers are playing on mobile, so it's not wise to make a desktop game if you're targeting India. The trend towards mobile gaming is presently seen across the globe actually, and it's opening up the opportunity for independent developers and new players to build mobile games in India for the globe. The next thing is that there's increased adoption of in-app purchases. While real money gaming, which is gambling, accounts for over 60% of overall casual gaming revenues, in-app purchases, which is someone buying a skin in a game, or you want to buy a new suit for yourself in the game of Marvel Rivals. That's an in-app purchase technically, and there are equivalents of that on mobile as well. It's growing at about 35% CAGR. 1/5 of Indian gamers use in-app purchases to augment their playing experiences. Games like PUBG, which is BGMI now, has proven that Indian gamers will pay if the game is good enough. And lastly, game development talent is emerging in India. Lots of global studios like Zynga, eSports, etc. are setting up operations in India, and we've seen the lateral movement of movie VFX designers joining gaming studios' animation teams. Now, let's first talk about the market for games in India. As you can see, there are 568 million gamers like we spoke about. 422 million are non-real money gamers. 90%, like I told you, of gamers are mobile gamers. 13% of India's gaming revenue comes from non-RMG. So look at the split, right? The RMG gamers are low in number, but they spend a lot. So it's very profitable to run one of these RMG type mobile gambling type apps. That's where most of India's gaming revenue comes from, but non-RMG revenue is not that high. And there are 144 million paying gamers in India. Now, this is the first contradiction that the report provides us, which is that India is ranked number 1 in the world in terms of gaming app downloads, but also does not rank in the top 15 in gaming app revenues. So a lot of us are very excited about building all of this, but we're like, where is the market? Free Fire, BGMI, Coin Master, Clash of Clans are among the highest grossing apps in India. They're generating over $150 million in revenue through in-app purchases. If the game is good, it seems like Indians will pay, but Indians also gravitate towards games that have the polish of an international studio. We have less than 10% of global gaming funding, right? And next, let's talk about game development, right? I'll give you my own experience of building that small demo, and we're working on some other stuff right now. Hopefully I can talk about it a little bit later. But the general process is you do a little bit of market research and development. You find out who's the target market for this, what is the story, etc., etc. You write that story, and typically what a lot of top game studios do is they'll write the story and then break it down into cutscenes. They say, okay, this is what cutscene 1 looks like, this is what cutscene 2 looks like. Then once you have that giant document, like 40-50 pages of every scene that ends up happening in the game, you start putting together concept art. You get a good artist and you say, well, how does my main character look? How does my villain look? How does this boss look, right? And then you say, what does this location look like? So you do all of that on the concept art level. Just try to do the pre-production work for the game. When you can use AI to generate concept art, you can generate very good concept art in Midjourney, a reference for people to look at, to figure out, does this fit? Does this vibe go? For both the locations as well as the character, and even for the UI to some extent, I think it makes things a lot easier to align everybody on and say, well, this is something we should do. So let's say this is the pre-production work, this is the pre-work. Then it's about putting the team together. Then it's about hiring 3D modelers to make your assets. It's about hiring environment artists. It's about hiring lighting artists, because environments and lighting are different. Environment is somebody makes a block out, which is these blocks that you have in the game that represents the various parts, the shops, the whatever level you want, right? So you have a level block out that's created. And then once the environment is actually done, there's a lighting artist who figures out mood and where everything is put up. It's a two-phase process. And if you look at a good top-tier AAA game, and one reference I found was Tomb Raider, right? The latest Tomb Raider had about 7 to 10 people in their environment art and lighting art team. That's not a massive team, but even finding those 10 people is a challenge, because you need people who are available, who don't currently have jobs, and who also have the taste of being really good artists. Because this has been handcrafted art for the last 1 or 2 years since photogrammetry kicked in. Photogrammetry is the ability for you to take pictures of an object, and you can now do it pretty well and get high quality assets out of it. It still doesn't eliminate all of the work, because you still need to clean up this photogrammetry, but you still need to start with things like concept art and references. Then you prototype the game. You have simple level runs that people can play, people give their feedback. Then you have QA, right? Which is the actual process of testing this. So once you have something that's shaped up, once you have the mechanics shaped up, you're able to build out all those mechanics in Unreal Engine or Unity. Most people use a game engine because it just makes life a lot easier. Even the studios that used to use their own game engines have now moved on and started using either Unreal or Unity. For mobile games too, there are other frameworks. Then you figure out the game release, you work with distribution channels, you ask somebody to publish your game. If you can get a publisher or you're releasing for a specific console, you can do that if you have those networks and you have that distribution. And then finally, you do the PR and marketing for it. I would say a big chunk of budgeting actually has to go in marketing, because there are a lot of games being released. How do you get the attention of people? If people search for your game, how do you appear on top? All of that is marketing, right? And you have to think about it at the time you make your game, because you need to know who the target audience for the game is. Lastly, there's engagement and analysis, which is if it's a multiplayer game, you're continuing to drive adoption, you want your fans to talk about it, you want to do community building around it, you want to manage the hype cycle, because sometimes games can be overhyped. You have to do merchandising around it, you can monetize through in-app purchases, you keep doing downloadable content, also called DLCs, or you do seasonal rewards like Fortnite, or you do a battle pass like Marvel Rivals and Fortnite. All of that is a continuous process, right? The game doesn't end once you finish the game, unless you're building like a single player game.
Okay, before we move on to the next section, I want to talk about the landscape of video editing jobs. To be honest, the demand is quite high right now. If you are an early stage talent and looking to break into a field where your odds of getting hired are high because of the supply-demand gap, video editing jobs might work out for you. Folks at AV Video School have done a really good job on this front. They have trained over 3,000 editors by now. They are hosting a video editing masterclass that covers the core video editing skills required to get hired. If you are interested, check the link in the description.
So if you look at this map, a game publisher typically owns and employs game development studios, and they do everything. They play across the stack. Sometimes if it's only the first part, a game dev studio will do it, and then they will work with the distribution channel to do the testing and the engagement and analysis. In this map, you can also see where game engines play, where ad networks play, so that you can monetize these games. If you want to run ads in mobile games, you have developer tools to actually help and deploy games. For example, if you're doing a multiplayer game, then there are services like Microsoft has services that allows you to do live play, eSports content. If you want to do like an eSports tournament, it's a separate team that actually manages that, and you can also outsource some of this at this point. And then finally, you can also outsource market research to other people, which I really don't recommend if you are sitting and taking the risk of making an entire game. So how do each of these people monetize? The game publishers monetize through game IPs. Once you own an IP, if you can make an Assassin's Creed work, there's demand for the next Assassin's Creed. So it kind of lowers risk, right? For a publisher to come in and spend more money or bet more money on it. Then you can also make money on game sales, merchandising. If somebody wants to make a movie out of it, then you make some money off the movie. Then there's the game studios, the development studios who do the IPs and do revenue sharing with the publishers. Then there's distribution channels, platform fees, commissions, memberships. Then there are game engines. Unreal Engine will make money only if you make more than $100,000 in revenue. They have a certain model for it. It's mostly revenue share. And then there's ad networks that take commission. Sometimes you just straight up pay them, so they're taking money from you. And then developer tools are like SaaS-based subscriptions, right? You pay $10, $20 for something that helps you. Esports content and community, you can see them monetizing through ad revenue, commissions, sponsorships. Then there's market research providers providers, which I'm not very bullish on. I don't think it's valuable for you making a game to outsource the research of the game to somebody else, because you're putting your story into it, and if you don't know if your story will resonate with an audience, it doesn't make sense. And you can't just ask random people, do you think this game will work? People don't know what will typically work, right? So in a way, you have to be your own audience for you to be able to create a game that's valuable. So we can give you some examples of game publishers like Sony or Valve or Tencent or even Activision, and Microsoft now is the same as Activision. They acquired Activision. Then there are also game development studios. You've heard of Rockstar, of course, the ones that make GTA. You've heard of Zynga that makes mobile games, and they used to make Facebook games many years in the past. You've seen distribution channels like Steam. You probably downloaded a game from Steam. You've seen the App Store. You've seen the Google Play Store. So in the game engines area, you have Unity, Unreal, Godot. Unity and Unreal are the most popular right now. They have the most number of game developers using it. A lot of people had custom game engines, which they ditched for Unity and Unreal just because it's simpler, it's constantly maintained, it's updated and upgraded. And as a game studio, if your goal is to make the end IP, there's no point of you working too much with the game engine. You can always modify the game engine if you need something. And Unreal is extensible in that sense. Now, talking about developer tools, there's Adobe and Blender. Next, there's of course eSports and content and community. So you have things like YouTube gaming and Discord and Twitch. And there are specific community platforms like Guilded, which I don't know if you've ever used. I don't know how popular they are at this point, but there is value in you building your own community, and the platforms actually support that. Then, as you can see from the market research providers, there's things like Sensor Tower. I think market research should be useful to see how much money another game made in your same space and see if you want to build an IP like that. But like I said, I don't think it's as useful as people think it is. Then of course there's hardware like Intel or Nvidia. You'd probably partner with some of them. They probably announce your game. But you can't do all of this without deep relationships with an Intel or an Nvidia. You need someone who already has those deep relationships, because it's not easy to build them on the fly. Now, according to Bloom, and here's where the VC angle comes in, what are the segments that they're looking to invest in? And let's go through it one by one. They like the green segments. They don't or not sure about liking the yellow segments, and the red segments are definitely not something they want to touch. If you look at game publishers, they want to see more game publishers in India who own the entire end-to-end problem statement. Then there's game development studios. They're not so bullish on game development studios, because if you're a game development studio, you guzzle a lot of cash and the outcomes might not be great. If you do want to make a game in India, especially a AAA game in India, you need somebody who's a gamer themselves who has a lot of free cash flow, because it's not very easy to get funding in India. I would assume you would not be able to raise. So it's an expensive affair and the outcome is uncertain, right? Just because another game worked in your segment, you don't know if your game will work. Maybe the other game worked because people really like the IP. Next, of course, they're very bullish about the distribution channels. They're very bullish about game engines. I think people really underestimate how difficult it is to build a game engine. I see a lot of kids on Twitter sometimes saying, oh, I built this part of a game engine, I built this renderer. We have one person in the team who's actually built a game engine, right? But to finish it, to get to Unreal level of expanse, it is going to take you like 200 people in a decade. And Unreal Engine has been around since forever, right? You had a previous version of Unreal 4. There was a UDK before that, Unreal Development Kit. It's gone through a very long cycle, and I don't know if Indian investors have the long-term horizon for that. But if you're talking about mobile game frameworks, maybe there is some opportunity there. You give your framework to a bunch of people and they become successful, and then you take like 5-10% of that. Maybe for mobile games this exists. Next, let's talk about the three types of gamers. There is a casual gamer whose job is to play while multitasking. I see them a lot in the plane. When I fly somewhere, they'll be sitting next to me and they'll be playing Candy Crush or they'll be playing some game. So they're usually playing to alleviate boredom during idle moments. And they want easy to play games. They actually don't want a complicated, game with tons of mechanics. They wouldn't be playing Dota. So they want something simple. Your monetization model is in-app purchases. So they would buy some skins or they would buy to pass a level or unlock a level. And we've seen a lot of this where there is actually a lot of money in allowing people to pay to skip a level. Next, there's mid-core gamers who want to play various game genres but lack the time commitment. So they want to stimulate the mind. They don't just want to play a trashy game to save time, right? Or to waste time. They actually want to stimulate the mind. They want to actually be challenged, but not too much. So you monetize them via in-app advertising and in-app purchases, similar way. But the way you would socially reward them, the way you would create retention is to create a leaderboard. Compare them against each other. Have social elements that you can add a friend along, maybe a little bit of multiplayer so that you can play casually with 3-4 friends. A good example of this is Among Us, which you can't play it with your brain switched off like Candy Crush. But at the same time, you can play it with 5-6 people. There are some purchases you can make over time. Lastly, there's the hardcore gamers. I grew up a hardcore gamer because I was left alone with a computer and an internet connection when I was very young. And I think hardcore gamers are very hard to please. What I've learned about hardcore gamers, the ones who pay, not the ones who pirate, are actually a little bit older than people think they are because they have aged over the last 10 years. So the hardcore gamer now is actually between 25 and 35. That sounds hard to believe, but I actually had OpenAI do deep research and figured this out. Right? I'm 32 and I'm a hardcore gamer. So its age range has evolved. Most of these people play these games to master the dynamics. Like Souls games are considered to be very hard, but you have like such a radical fan base about it because they're always like, look, I won this hard game. It feels like a self-mastery. Now the monetization monetization of this is, of course, you can bill them for in-app purchases, but most of the time you would be billing them on a flat fee. You pay 4,000 or 5,000 rupees, download the game from PlayStation or Steam or something like that, and just get to playing. Some of them have in-app purchases, which is if you're a Marvel Rivals, it's free to play, but you are paying for a battle pass so that you can keep getting rewards. So there is some type of mid-core type retention dynamics there, but monetization is mostly this. Lastly, eSports really works here. Dota has something called the International, which is a tournament that happens every year, and the International is something that's attended by a lot of people. It's something to look forward to. A lot of people watch the live streams. It keeps people interested in the game. There are battle passes like we've spoken about. There's live ops. There's title renewals, which is WWE will come out with WWE 2K22, and then they'll come out with 2K23 and 24 and 24, which is kind of the same game, but with small modifications, and people do rebuy because they want to stay current. So let's talk about how gamers evolve. They start as casual gamers. Sometimes they go to mid-core gamers, and sometimes mid-core gamers become hardcore gamers. I'll tell you my own evolution. When I was young, I used to play casual games, right? Very, very young. I used to play a game called Virtua Cop. Most of you probably don't know the game. And I used to spend a lot of time on Miniclip, right? There was a Dragon Ball Z game on Miniclip that I would really enjoy playing. I really cared about IP. I really care about IP. And I think a lot of gamers really care about IP, right? If it's a Dragon Ball game, I'll play it. And then you slowly evolve. One of the first mid-core games that I played was a game called Delta Force. Many, many years ago, I got a demo and I was like, this is pretty interesting. And it kind of got me into gaming. And then finally, I started playing games like Heretic, which is a very, very old game. Most of you will not remember it. But I played a game called Heretic, and then eventually you evolve, you pick up Dota, and then your entire life goes for waste. I'm just kidding, but that's how the evolution of a gamer goes, right? Which is you start casual and then slowly, you become mid-core and then eventually you become a hardcore gamer. I also do believe that going from casual to mid-core is a function of device. And I feel India has the time to play hardcore games too. A lot of people have the time, but they just don't have the devices. If you don't have a decent computer with a decent GPU, or if you don't have a PlayStation or an Xbox, how are you expecting them to play many of these AAA games? So I think it's a device thing that's preventing us from becoming more hardcore gamers. Okay, so now let's talk about the types of distribution platforms. So there's mobile, where the session lengths are actually only typically 5 minutes long. So in China, more than 46% of smartphone gamers spend over an hour on average per session. I actually fully expect this to happen in India, and it's probably already happening in India. The investment required to make some of these games is low. You can make a game in $50,000 to $300,000, which is, you can make a game in like 1.5 to 2 crores. I would assume if you're doing it with a level of, like a serious level of polish, you can do it in 20-25 crores. Then let's talk about PC gamers. The average PC gamer spends between 70 to 20 minutes gaming per day. That's actually a reasonably significant amount of time of your day that you're spending on a PC game. The console gamer spends over an hour a day, which is why it's slightly more profitable to spend on console, because they are looking for games all the time, and you can't really trial and pirate games very easily. So you're making an investment every time you buy a game, so they tend to finish these games. The top 4 games have 100 minutes per day playtime. So in the investment, it takes between 1 to 5 years to develop a PC or console game, depending on the game complexity. Most publishers spend anywhere between $500K to $3 million, that's about 30 crores. I would say it's a little bit higher, but let me finish this statement, on PC console game development. An AA or a AAA title takes a lot more. I actually have something to say about AA and AAA. I think the costs of AA or AAA game development have fallen a lot, and a lot of people haven't noticed this. What I mean by that is, take a character for example. 5 years ago, you have to model this character, you have to sculpt this character, which requires a very experienced human to sit down there and do it. Everything from the face to the body to whatnot. But in the last 1 or 2 years, and Call of Duty has this video on this, right, on how they did their latest game, where they used a lot of photogrammetry, where they just have this cage, this rig, this light and camera rig, where you can just scan the character. And it turns out those character scans look pretty good in game. So you don't actually have to go through the effort of sculpting the entire body. I can see how it would take like 50-60 people to just work on characters in an old school, like 5 years ago if a game started. But after the invention of Unreal's MetaHuman, after a lot of people have learned how to hack MetaHuman to make their own kind of characters, and after MetaHuman themselves have allowed you to add custom heads, I think it's gotten a little bit easier to create characters. And if you're thinking about clothes, if you see a lot of the modern games, including Call of Duty, is actually using photogrammetry for clothes, which people have sort of just missed. And those photogrammetry tools have now sort of started getting automated. You can actually make or buy an automated rig. There's a rig called the Arago rig that actually does automated photogrammetry with any DSLR camera. So it's really speeding up this process, because I can imagine how much sheer effort it would take if you're sitting and modeling clothes for every character, which is how it was done 5 years ago. See, that's the thing about technology, right? Technology's job is to always bring down the cost of something. So when people say a AAA game should cost a minimum of $30 million, I actually don't believe that, because I think it used to cost $30 million 5 years ago, but with a lot of the tools we have now, it's probably much lower in terms of cost, because you don't need as much skill talent. Secondly, even with locations and environments, you can do photogrammetry. Wukong is a good example of this, because Wukong actually ran laser scanners in temples to get an accurate sculpt of some of the things and sculptures in the scene. And that is very useful, because now Now you don't have to sculpt it manually. Same with actual development. Do you know companies like Ubisoft, companies like Rockstar, they all have their own game engines. Just imagine how much it costs to build your own game engine. And sometimes that's baked into the cost of the game. So now that everyone's shifted over to Unreal and Unity, the costs have significantly dropped. Then things like voice generation, which has gotten easier, things like animation that you can actually use Move AI rig. There's a Move AI rig where you can have multiple cameras in a ring, and those cameras can actually get your animations to be much more accurate than even suits, which is surprising and strange, but they are using AI behind the scenes to sort of do that. I think abstraction, just like the cost of building an app today, is much lower than what it was when I started my career, when I built JobSpire, right? Almost 12 years ago. We didn't have Razorpay or Stripe back then. Stripe wasn't in India. They existed, but they weren't in India. You had to literally build on top of what the bank had provided you, which is just totally different time. So a lot of abstraction has happened because of other SaaS providers and tools. Now you can get some assets from scans from other companies. For example, there's a company called Quicksell that provides a lot of these scans. And sometimes I'll pay a AAA game, and I'll be like, I recognize that scan. This is from Quicksell. So if I had to predict the cost, it should cost you about 150, 200 crores, which is still significant in the US to build a game. But if you're in India and you have price parity advantages, maybe you can get one done for 30 or 40 crores, which makes it pretty reasonable, because even the cost of travel to go out and shoot, an asset and come back, let's say you're shooting a temple and you're coming back, it's much lower in India compared to taking a flight from San Francisco to New York and scanning something and coming back. In fact, what I've noticed is that on console, the title of AAA forces people to buy. A lot of people buy AAA games simply because it signifies quality. It's like saying a blockbuster film, right? But actually, if you ask me, a Souls-like game is considered AAA. A lot of people say it's AAA and it sells like hotcakes, but I don't really think it's AAA. It's actually much lower quality than some of the other games. If you compare a Star Wars game and a Souls-like game, the Star Wars game will look 10 times better. So I think it's a made-up term, and I don't think you should attach it to budget, because the budget will always fall as technology gets better. A lot of people in the middle will build SaaS solutions to solve all the different parts of what we saw. And that's why I feel like there will be a time point where India is able to do AAA games, and somebody will prove it. I think somebody will prove it this year. Now let's talk about eSports. So with eSports, of course, the infra is things like OBS, and NVIDIA has tools for this, XSplit has tools for this. You can distribute on things like YouTube and Twitch. But I think this set of influencers and streamers streaming a game is super important. I think if you can get enough influencers to talk about your game, you make progress, right? Because I make game buying purchase decisions based on how many people are talking about it. Because the cost is high, right? At 5,000-6,000 rupees, you can't buy a game that you don't like playing. Or if everyone's talking about a game, then you're like, I might as well pay 5,000-6,000 rupees for this. Esports attracts millions of viewers and clocked 532 million views across games in 2022. The total prize money globally for esports in 2022 was $240 million, which is significant, pitting it against other popular sports. The market size is about $1.38 billion in 2022. And of course, the target audience is casual viewers, enthusiasts, and sometimes even hardcore gamers that want to learn a trick or two. Sometimes it's also lonely people who want to watch somebody else gaming while they're eating lunch or something. The audience for esports and watching streaming is diverse. And of course, the monetization model for esports for the creator is like gifts, it's sponsorships, brand sponsorships. For the platforms, it's a cut of all this gift revenue. It is a cut of advertising. And for the esports teams, it is tournaments, right? If you win a tournament, then you make money. Yeah, so let's talk about esports for a second. In terms of some math, the upcoming esports World Cup in Saudi Arabia 2024 is set to feature the largest prize pool in esports history with $45 million up for grabs, which is pretty cool. So Bloom believes that esports teams follow the same dynamics as a leading Bollywood production house. The teams end up signing star talent, which then helps them win tournaments and attract more sponsors. Considering the reliance on constantly churning out talent and maintaining meaningful relationships with media plus brands, we would want to track the team from sidelines before forming a solid opinion on what makes a winning team. Interesting that Bloom's thinking about investing in an esports team. It's interesting. I don't know if it'll work out. I feel like the talent gets old and then moves on, and then a lot of the loyalty builds towards that talent, and then you have a problem. So I don't think it's as greenlit as you'd expect it to be. So now let's talk about Bloom's game design formula, which is that they say that you have a gameplay, you have a core loop, and then you have a meta game. I'll give you an example. A core loop is the game you play, right? Like how do you attack, how do you do this, how do you do that. A meta game is what are the right ways to play the game. In Marvel Rivals, there is a bad way to play Spider-Man, there is a good way to play Spider-Man. So the meta game is who are the characters you should play? Are they balanced? Is the game balanced? Is there one character that's too overpowered? So game balance, things like that, it comes under meta game. So the gameplay mechanics actually impact scale. The harder your game is, the core loop of your game is very, very hard to play, there's actually a smaller audience. There's less number of people who play because you kind of eliminate the casuals. The tougher it is to beat in multiplayer to win against your opponents, the smaller your TAM, right? Because what ends up happening is the gamer gets frustrated losing again and again to somebody else who's like sniping you from all over the place, and then you say, I don't want to play Valorant anymore. So a lot of people actually quit Valorant in the first few weeks, first few months, because they're just not good enough to play the game. And that can end up happening. If you made your mom or your dad play the game, they'll probably quit after a while, because it's how the meta game is right now. Then there's the genre. And what I found about games is you take a format that you know works, like Overwatch. You already knew that the 6 versus 6 shooter format with shields and this and that works with 3 different roles. And then Marvel Rivals basically copied Overwatch to the T. I'm telling you, it's not an exaggeration. Every character you play in Marvel Rivals, except 1 or 2 characters, have an exact clone or have exact skill clones in Overwatch. It's so, I don't want to use the word dirty, but it's so blatant that it's actually good, because there are a lot of characters in Overwatch that I enjoyed playing, and I see those same characters in Rivals and I'm like, cool, I'm into the game. So it's a very easy way to port audience from the previous game to your new game. So I think I've noticed that in general, right, the entire idea around copying something that works and then adding your spin on it is not a bad idea. It actually works in many different businesses. It's how VCs invest. It's how you lower risk. And Rivals has proved it to us, and people are now shitting on Overwatch and playing Rivals, right? So even though it's a blatant copy. So let's talk about that for a second. You see this slide. You can see that in Clash of Clans, the gameplay and mechanics are resource gathering, building a base, training troops, etc. The genre is strategy games. It's still fantasy and village. But as you can see, a new game came out called Lords Mobile that is kind of the same. The meta game is slightly different, and the setting is fantasy, but instead of village, it's kingdom. The platforms are similar, but the acquisition strategy is slightly different. The monetization mechanism are almost the same, and the monetization mechanism actually involves new game modes and features. You see Whiteout Survival, it's actually the same thing in a similar genre, but it's apocalypse and glacial. And there's a 4x there. The 4x is about how quickly you gather resources. So how quickly do you get through the game loop? And I think the differentiation can be on anything. If you want to build an Age of Empires, you're like, I'll build Age of Empires, but I'll build it in India. There are a lot of angles now because of the Indian story that you can take existing things that work, but give it a completely new spin in terms of genre. You also have a very different way to acquire customers now than in the past. And also monetization, because now it's easy to pay across the world. You can also choose to not charge too much upfront, but charge for more in-app purchases. So I wanted to leave you with this slide because I want to tell you that ultimately, I don't know how many people will really invent new mechanics. Your game mechanics, every game I play today, AAA or casual or whatever, right, has similar game mechanics to something I've seen in the past, but I would still play if it's a Dragon Ball game. When Dragon Ball Sparking Zero released, I bought it because I was like, it's a Dragon Ball game. I love the IP. So I think all this being there, I think IP really matters. If you can create something that people love and there's a story behind it and there's a lore behind it, it's what's happened to the Souls games, it's what happened to Sekiro, it's what's happened to Assassin's Creed. I think you need IP, you need intellectual property. IP stands for intellectual property. It's a made up thing, it's a made up world, it's a made up story, but the user needs to care about it. The player needs to care about it. That's very hard. That is very, very hard. That's why I actually don't believe that text to 3D in the short term at least will do a very good job here, because the minute you do that, you're cheapening your game. The minute you use a building which you've generated with AI or a character you generated with AI, like actually generate the 3D mesh for it, I don't know how it's going to play out in 5 years, but in the short term, I think it cheapens the experience. So I think building authentic IP is really the name of the game here, whether it be on casual games or whether it be on mid-core or hardcore. And of course on RMG, it's how do you create an addiction which has nothing to do with IP. I want to leave with one last thing, right? And there's one more slide here which I forgot, which is how the future of this is going to be. And Bloom talks a lot about how AI is going to be useful in games. You can have NVIDIA ACE, you can have the audio to lip. There's a lot of advancements in AI that help you make games easily. Like I've said, we shouldn't be generating AI-generated 3D models slop unless they actually look very good, which they don't right now. And it's going to take a few years. If you look at just image diffusion timeline, it's going to take a few years because image diffusion can still makes mistakes, which in a game will be very visible because of the 3D character. So I think AI first development, there are parts that maybe with cutscene expansion, AI can help with the dialogue and stuff like that. But you have to know cleverly, you have to use your common sense and brains whether you'll make the game end up looking inauthentic or whether you're just speeding up menial work. And I think for speeding up menial work, there's a lot of value in using AI. One point I want to say, which I agree with what Bloom says, which is there's going to be a democratization of game creation. For a very long time, movies were only made by big budget studios. This kind of camera quality that you're seeing on screen right now, it wasn't the realm of creators. This was the realm of big studios who could afford these cameras and rent it. But camera technology got cheaper. Today with a phone, you can get the kind of cinema camera quality that existed 5 years ago in movies or 10 years ago in movies. It's sort of the same. They're using software processing on the iPhone or any other phone to make it look a little better, but it's kind of the same. Sure, we still have movies, but we also have YouTube. And we saw much better content, it was quicker content, shorter. We still have creators and IP that we care about and we have loyalty to. So I think the same thing is going to happen to games. I think there's going to be a democratization. There is going to be a YouTube for games, which I think is Steam, right? Or Epic Games. But it's going to be not made by the biggest. The difference, but the gap between the biggest studios and the smaller ones who are able to kind of create the same thing at a much lower cost because of, drop in costs of all of these these things, the quality of outputs will not be that different. And people will still go watch a movie if there's Salman Khan or Shah Rukh Khan. Similarly, people still play an Assassin's Creed game, right? It's IP. Salman and Shah Rukh have IP. But I think for new IP, the new celebrities in India, I don't think are the third generation Bollywood folks. You don't care about them as much, but you do care about creators. It'll become national news if something happens to a creator today, but it's not national news as much if it happens to a tier B or a tier C celebrity. So the IP, the person or the game, the story, the lore, all of that really matters. So if you focus there, as the costs drop, people like you, me, and a bunch of others will be able to run some experiments here, and maybe we'll see a lot of people in India making and consuming games. That's it for me. Bye-bye, and make sure you subscribe.